Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. It's a big decision day in America today, but the biggest decision for all we debtor nations and in debt populations is to decide, are we powerless to tackle bankers, or is it time to rip it up and start again? Rise up! Stacey?
Max, that sounds a lot like the front page, the cover, I might add, of the Independent on Sunday magazine. That's Max Keiser, rip it up and start again. Of course, you're talking about the U.S. elections, and it's time to rip it up and start again. But this is something that hasn't happened. We've just been in Ireland. We saw it there. The social contract has been ripped up by our politicians, by our leaders, by the heads of banks across the world.
That's right. The social contract has been ripped up in countries like Ireland, in countries like Greece, and in the U.S. as well. The social contract has been ripped up. The powers that be want to simply transform the current population to neo-feudal serfs. And that's wrong. Since the social contract has been broken, it's up now for the populations to rise up, stage some kind of insurrection, and start again. That's what the point of the story is. Rip it up and start again. Let's start again. You need a new Declaration of Independence from banking occupation. That's what's happening in Ireland. That's what's happening in Greece.
Well, politicians and the banksters have already done half of it for you, okay? They have ripped it up, as I said. The social contract is ripped up. The U.S. Constitution is ripped up. As George W. Bush, the previous president, said, it was just a piece of paper. It was easy to rip up, he said.
Right. Well, the biggest mistake that bankers, central bankers, and policymakers in Japan and around the world is to try to prop it up instead of letting rip it up. Don't try to prop it up. Just let it collapse. The people are ingenious. They will rise up and they'll create governments. You just have to trust the people.
So, Max, this is Irish Finance Minister Michael Noonan. Noonan, I'm powerless to tackle bankers' pay and perks. Powerless, 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 powerless.
It's shameless that this character, Noonan, in Ireland, claims to be powerless. This completely asymmetric view of how power and democracy is distributed throughout a society, throughout an economy. Now, Noonan, of course, has all the power in the world to do what's in the best interest of the people of Ireland. But he pretends that he has no power, that he's powerless. He's powerless over his own stupidity. I agree with that. He's powerless over all kinds of shameless behavior. That's true. But he's not powerless in acting in the best interest of Ireland. He has the power to do that, but he doesn't, because he's a social misfit, and he should be removed from his place of office immediately.
We were at the Kilkenomics Festival in Kilkenny, Ireland, however, and this was before this headline of the finance minister saying, I am powerless. Right? So why elect a leader? Why elect these governments if they're powerless to do anything? But when we were down there, we noticed the audience listened to the likes of Bill Black. Here's a former bank regulator who said, your banks have committed crimes. I could see that. I, as a bank regulator, would put them in jail. The audience stood up, some of the younger people, and said, it's our moral obligation to pay their debts.
Right. Well, you know, this character, Noonan, he won the Debating Society Award from university over there in Stab City in Limerick, and the year after I did. And then he went to town trying to remove any record of me winning the same award that he won. So he's a revisionist on top of being a powerless nincompoop. It says he's powerless. He's obviously on the paymasters of the lords of the banks that he serves, and he's destroyed. He's part of this kleptocracy in Ireland that's just destroying the society there.
Well, this has come to light because not only has AIB, which is Allied Irish Bank, received a 21 billion euro bailout, but Anglo-Irish Bank, which is not referred to as AIB, but Anglo-Irish Bank has received a 34 billion euro payout. And the Sunday Independent has also learned that 15 of the most senior figures at Anglo-Irish Bank from the time of the September 2008 are still employed at the institution on salaries believed to be in excess of 150,000 euros. So even though the taxpayer owns this bank, even though these crooks running this bank, these 15 guys, are still there because Michael Noonan says he is not legally empowered to remove them.
Well, look, when we landed at the airport on our way to the Kilkenomics Economics Festival, Comedy Festival, I saw Colbert Craverson Roberts cab waiting to pick up bankers from KKR, private equity group. There's also active in the group Carlyle, private equity, Blackstone, private equity. These are the vulture capitalists that Noonan is inviting in to pick over the carcass of the dead country. Remember, Ireland was not suffering from a debt problem before the crisis. They were able to pay their social welfare system, no problem. It was only during that period where the government, thanks to idiots like Noonan, transferred all the liabilities from Anglo-Irish Bank to the people guaranteeing those liabilities, did they suddenly find themselves in a debt problem. Now they're being asked to cut back on social services to pay for these crooks.
But here is the finance minister, Max. He is saying he is not legally empowered to end these people's contracts, these bankers' contracts. He was not legally empowered to transfer those debts to the population. There was a private contract between Anglo-Irish Bank and Goldman Sachs and French banks and German banks. It was a private contract. Nowhere on that contract, nowhere, were the Irish citizens mentioned as being legally responsible for these debts. And yet, why aren't the people rising up? Why aren't they ripping it up and starting again, as Max Keiser says? Right.
So Noonan and his coterie of crony capitalists had no legal power to transfer that debt. Yet they did. And now to tackle the aftermath of that, they're saying, oh, we have no legal power to reverse the crimes that we committed, the anti-constitutional criminality that Noonan is involved with. He has no basis for stand up and be responsible for that.
Now, you mentioned that all these cutbacks in the services and obligations to the citizen. Well, Noonan's admission comes as it was also revealed that the former Anglo-Irish Bank, which has received more than 34 billion euros of taxpayer money to date, is the only defined benefit pension scheme in the country which is fully funded. The fact is, again, the people of Ireland, you got to rip it up and start again, because these guys are being paid on an illegally induced, fraudulently induced contract. You were never party to that contract. I looked at the Anglo-Irish contract, the bond deal between Goldman Sachs and Anglo-Irish, between the French banks and the German banks and Anglo-Irish. Nowhere was there a single citizen of Ireland that signed that contract. So you do not owe this money to these bankers. You do not owe them this welfare, this social welfare, this 529,000 euros a year for this guy to continue being a bankster schmuck.
Right, well, Bill Black was in Ireland during Kilkenomics. He said point blank that Irish people have no legal responsibility to pay these unsecured debts. But these school kids in the audience, these children, these young people were saying, oh, but we have a moral responsibility. You know, kids, you're suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Whatever drugs you're on, stop taking them and get with the program. You don't have to be abused by banking terrorists.
Well, it's not drugs. It's called the Independent on Sunday. It's called the Irish press. All of the press is telling them that they have a moral obligation to pay the debts of these private bankers. But you know, all they have to do is read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations to discover what capitalism is, and you'll see there that actually you don't owe these debts.
I try to get the people in Ireland to go on boycotting the licensing fee for TV. You know, that would be great civil disobedience. Don't pay the licensing fee. Shut down the media. They're doing nothing but, violating all kinds of rights by misinforming you. They're guilty by misinformation.
Well, actually, just go. There's a thing called the internet. Just go on there, find some information. Now, another headline, another bailed out bankster bank in Ireland, AIB to write off some mortgage debts, but no blanket amnesty. The Republic's largest mortgage lender, AIB, that's Allied Irish Bank, will write off the debts of distressed mortgage holders where it finds they cannot afford to repay them. But it has again ruled out blanket debt forgiveness. This is only about 10,000 people that they're going to help them with forgiving some of their debt. But David Duffy, the chief executive, says, no, we can't. He warned against widespread debt forgiveness when most customers were repaying their mortgages and did not get into financial trouble by investing investing heavily in property. AIB would be in very dangerous territory where people who made mad decisions should get part of their debt magically waived, he told the Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform. Max, the very next sentence says, the state-controlled bank, which received a 21 billion euro public bailout, i.e. its debt problem was magically waved away by the same population. He's saying, we can't magically wave away your debts because that would be moral hazard.
Right, but we had our debts magically waved away.
Yeah.
And now AIB wants to be in the business of deciding who lives and who dies. Well, they kicked out the Vatican, right? So the AIB wants to step in and be the new turncoat.
Well, speaking of talking about the Vatican being kicked out, Max was kicked off the Pat Kenny show for talking about one bankster who, while we were there, was sentenced to 9 weeks in prison because he wouldn't, for contempt of court, because he wouldn't reveal where his 500 million euros outside the country was. Warning of civil unrest if Quinn is sent to prison. Not if Quinn is not sent to prison. This was if this banker guy was sent to prison. A campaign group set up to support Sean Quinn and his family have warned of potential civil unrest if he goes to jail or falls ill as a result of ongoing legal battles.
That's right. Potential civil unrest. Don't do intelligent civil unrest, like don't pay your TV licensing fee. Do unintelligent civil unrest by going out in the street and protesting if this banking fraudster, Sean Quinn, spends 9 weeks in prison. Now, after this ruling came out, I will let you know, and I'll let you know, that Sean Quinn's family reached out to me, and we're going to be interviewing, hopefully, Sean or one of his family members on the Keiser Report in the upcoming week, so he will have a chance to present his case. What I'm interested, of course, is their insight into their relationship with Anglo-Irish Bank, who, of course, is the capo de capo in this situation. They're kind of like the Tony Soprano of gangsters in Ireland.
But here's a quote from this woman who runs this group called Concerned Irish Citizens for this group supporting Sean Quinn. Her name is Patricia Gilhenny, and she says, many have also commented that if Sean Quinn or any of his family drop dead from the sheer pressure and stress that they are being subjected to on a daily basis, there will be very serious consequences for their perpetrators and for those who facilitated this horror. But that brings me back to the top of the show, and that is rip it up and start again, is horrors have been inflicted upon the American population, the European population, the Irish and British population, the Asian, Middle East, populations around the world due to these banksters and their crimes against the capital.
Well, whenever I'm in Ireland, people come up to me all the time and ask me, Max, when are you going to run for president? You know, it may just happen. Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. We'll be talking to Simon Rose. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Simon Rose of Save Our Savers, a bit like Save the Whales.
Yeah, I think maybe Savers are probably closest to extinction the way things are going.
I think so. You know, it's interesting, ecology and finance, they should actually approach finance like ecology because the markets are being intoxified with toxic bonds and toxic policies. Greenpeace should open a branch on Wall Street. I've been saying that for years. But anyway, Simon, you've brought in a fascinating study here from William F. Ford, ex-president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, produced this report. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, everybody's been saying that low interest rates are the way to produce growth, or at least not everybody, but those people who think the way to get forward is more borrowing. But his team actually calculated what would happen if the people who used to get their income still had it. And he said that low interest rates are costing the US economy an annual $371 billion in spending, 3.5 million jobs, and 2.53% of GDP. And it says, with higher interest income levels, output could grow more than twice as fast as it has, and the US economy would be well on its way to a vigorous recovery. And that's coming from an ex-central banker.
This is extremely important, I think, because if interest rates are allowed to remain in a normal level, reflective of the economy without government interference, then people with savings would generate a huge amount of income on their savings, and that income, of course, can be used to spend. But that spending is not happening because the interest rates are artificially brought down to near 0%. and the idea being that the government was going to increase demand somehow by having cheap rates. But
which is ludicrous. The trouble is, they're all theoretical economists. They don't seem to understand how real people behave. So we're in a debt crisis, so the people who are heavily indebted are probably not going to be spending that much more. They're going to try and retrench. So the people who had money, the savers, suddenly think, gracious, we've got the governor of the Bank of England saying this is going to go on 5 more years. We better husband our resources. We can get almost nothing on our savings. The instinct is to hang on to your money, even though you're actually losing money through negative real interest rates. It's not to go out and suddenly spend as if there's no tomorrow. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's without talking about, of course, whether the central banks should actually be controlling the price of money anyway.
So the arbitrage of interest rates on your savings versus the daily workings of a bank are been working for generations. The bank offers savers a rate of interest. It then loans money out at a different rate of interest, and therein lies the spread that they use to create profits for the bank. But since the banks have become involved not with traditional banking, but in speculation, they feed on artificially cheap interest rates to fuel another set of arbitrage, which is the amount of negative interest rates that they can borrow against to fuel speculative bets using derivatives in the hopes of capturing huge gains that they say will eventually trickle down to society at large, but somehow never do. And you've got this enormous hole in economics where the savers who would traditionally perform the role of increasing spending by the fact that they're saving. You know, it's capitalism, right? Capitalism, you need capital. To have capital, you need an interest rate to attract capital.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they don't seem to understand, that savings provide the investment money we need to produce growth. So what do you do in a debt crisis? Well, let's just sit on savers and let's squeeze them till they're really hurt. We talked about 6 months ago. At that stage, I would have thought interest rates for savers couldn't go any lower. But they're going lower and lower. And now in the UK, the latest idea to help the banks out is this funding for lending scheme, which is giving the banks incredibly cheap money, which in theory they should be lending on. They're probably not going to. And all that's happened is they don't need savers' money anymore, so interest rates have gone down still lower.
Simon Rose of Save Our Savers, interest rates in Switzerland are negative 0.5%. There are 6 countries in Europe where savings rates in those countries are negative. People are allowing the banks to take money from them to just hold on at a guaranteed loss.
So what we're seeing is the decapitalization of the West. I mean, it's extraordinary. Eventually, there'll be no savings left, and where are we going to be then? They keep arguing in this country about the difference between austerity and growth. They don't seem to understand how wealth and growth are created in the first place. The level of knowledge about the economy among the people who are actually deciding what's happening is absolutely asinine. I mean, in the UK, for instance, we've had the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister and even the Chancellor on occasion have got confused over the difference between the deficit and the debt.
For George Osborne occasionally watches this show, my understanding, to pick up on some of the things he missed out when he was out there at some Piggly Wiggly party at Eton. So tell him what the difference is.
The deficit is simply the extra amount you're borrowing each year. The debt is the total amount you're owing. And unfortunately, in the UK, although the perception is that the government is actually, well, the perception among many people is they're reducing the debt. Not only are they not reducing the debt, the deficit, which was due to come down in this current financial year to about £92 billion, well, the latest projections are it's going to be 120, maybe 130, up on last year. So it's not only is the debt not going down, the deficit is going back up. And we currently owe about, as a government, £1 trillion. That's due on their forecast to go up to £1.5 trillion in 3 years.
As a percentage of GDP, that represents?
Well, that will. At the moment, we're on about 2/3 of GDP. It's going to go up to, like America, by about 3 years, it'll be 100% of GDP.
Okay.
And that's not including, of course, all the contingent liabilities that they don't bother to put in the figures. So it's pretty scary. We're in a debt crisis, and the debt is getting worse.
Okay, so the government deficit's heading to 100% of GDP or higher. What's the consumer debt to GDP situation?
That's similar. It's about 100% at the moment.
Okay,
the biggest problem, of course, is the financial sector.
Okay, financial sector debt to GDP.
It depends who you talk to. McKinsey figures will show that if you add up all the sectors, which including about 300% in the financial sector, you get to about 500% debt to GDP for all the sectors. But other people, Morgan Stanley worked it out and said it's 10 times GDP.
So let's split the difference, say it's 7.5 times. So that's plus 8.5 for the national debt, plus another 100% for private debt. So that's almost 1,000% debt to GDP for the UK at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what was Iceland before it imploded?
I can't remember.
It's about 1,000% debt to GDP. And if in fact, now this is a policy that's just not, it's not unique to the UK. Every government in the world is pursuing this race to the bottom, by devaluing its currency, bringing in ZIRP, 0% interest rates, this faulty idea that by making debt so cheap that you're carving out the very essence of your economy and destroying your currency, you're going to somehow stimulate export growth.
It's like a lot of leaking lifeboats. It's just which lifeboat is actually leaking least. Let's try and jump in that one. It's ridiculous. You say it's a race to the bottom.
Right, so you got two lifeboats, both with holes in them, and with people standing in those boats bailing out by dumping water from their boat that they're bailing out into the one next to them. And that's going on simultaneously back and forth all over the world, and the whole thing is sinking. And now, the apocalypse, the paper apocalypse that's coming, as all of this, and by the way, government bonds, which are really kind of the biggest bubble in the history of the world, with the U.S. 10-year Treasury note trading at a 240-year high. It's in a bigger bubble than even tulip bulbs in the 1600s. With that enormous bubble now ready to burst and the paper apocalypse coming upon us, many suggest that those with the most gold will survive. In a leper colony, those with the gold teeth do best. I just made that up. But anyway, UK, of course, thanks to Gordon Brown, is not doing well on that front either.
No, Gordon Brown sold gold. Not just sold a gold at the bottom, but actually announced he was going to be selling the gold before he did so, which, from a trading point of view, is not the smartest thing to do. Though I have seen articles saying that, in fact, he was actually doing it to help out the banks at the time, which had an overextended position. I still don't know if that's true or not. I'm told in some quarters by people who do know about gold that, yeah, that's the real story.
He sold half of Britain's gold. Now Britain has 310 tons of gold, which is not that much more than Greece, versus the Eurozone, which has 12,000 tons of gold. What do you make of this spat between Cameron and the Eurozone? It seems like Cameron is sticking his foot in his mouth, because if in fact there's a split and the monetary banking union stays in Eurozone and the UK is isolated, the UK stands to lose because they have this huge debt burden. Who's there to fund the debt? You're going to go to the European partners and fund all this debt?
But in most of the arguments about the EU, it's all about, oh, we trade so much with the EU, we need to be in the EU. Of course, the most important thing is how extended our banks are to what's going on in Europe. I mean, if you know, if the euro goes down, I'm sure it will have an appalling effect in this country too.
But who's going to fund this 1,000% GDP ratio? This is the worst indebtedness of any of the G20 countries.
Appalling. But you've got this idea among many economists that debt just simply doesn't matter. For every debtor, there's a creditor. Therefore, we can just ignore it completely. I don't believe that for a minute. I don't think most savers believe it. The problem is we're getting into a really terrible position, and they've stalemated themselves. They're painted themselves into a corner. What is the natural way out now? It's almost all the options are appalling to think of. Almost the best bad option is just stagnation.
But my point, though, isn't Cameron painting himself into a corner? Because if they bring in a fiscal union, which it looks like they will, that's an enormous piece of business that's not going to be run through Frankfurt. And to manage this huge new lending facility, new central banking facility, it'll be in euros. It won't be in British pounds. Britain will have isolated itself from this business, and the banking center, which Britain prides itself on, is going to be diluted. Not only do they have the scandals of HSBC, which has just announced another $500 million worth of money laundering charges tied to Mexican drug cartels to bring that total liability, 50 or 60% beyond what it was even 2 weeks ago. But and not only LIBOR goes through London, not only does London have this reputation for AIG, Bernie Madoff, the MF Global scandal.
Yeah, we're world leaders
in scandal. Okay, so now, as capital requirements are increased, as people are attacking the UK as a banking fraud nexus, and as the euro is taking the business over to the continent, but how can Cameron argue that, with a straight face to the population, that he won't be dictated to by those European bureaucrats? Isn't he just blowing his own brains out?
How can he argue with a straight face? Because he's a politician. All he's concerned about is the next election. And that's part of the problem. We're getting short-termist politicians running everything, when what we need are people who actually are thinking for the long term and working out how to get out of the crisis. Like most politicians, by the time it really hits, the chances are he'll be off doing speeches at £1 million a time, as many of our ex-premiers are doing.
Now, there's been some dissension in the ranks, Simon Rose of Save Our Savers. Mervyn King, of course, Bank of England, outgoing Bank of England head, he's been really pointing the finger and saying that the policies of quantitative easing really are at best, a Band-Aid situation that fixes nothing. And he's really, I think, trying to bring some reality into the mix.
Strange, isn't it? Now that he's retiring, suddenly we're hearing words of wisdom from him. Though he still never admitted that, of course, the MPCs had anything to do with the situation we're in. No, Mervyn King is saying reasonably sensible things, even Charlie Bean saying reasonably sensible things. The most sensible thing I've heard from the Bank of England, though, who actually admitted in a report that the real effect of QE was to transfer money from the poorest in society to the wealthiest, is from Spencer Dale, the chief economist, who said, surely one lesson we've learned from the financial crisis is that economists and policymakers know less about the economy and its behaviour than many might have liked to believe. We don't fully understand the structure of the economy or the behaviour of households and companies within it. Not even close. And he concluded, is there a danger we might do more harm than good? I think we know how to answer that.
Right. The answer for a complicated system seems to make it more complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, of course, one of the corollaries of the definition of insanity.
Yeah, so they're just admitting that nothing they can do. It's too complicated for them to do anything. We've got to do something anyway. And, of course, what they've done are the wrong things.
All right, Simon Rose of Save Our Savers, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, mate.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Simon Rose of Save Our Savers. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.